Sharing my. I always. Okay. Um, shall we wait a tiny bit more, like 2-3 minutes, or
I think you can start with the
like we know?
roll call and welcome bits.
Okay. Okay. So, hi everyone. This is I'm Michelle Belgen. Today I'm going to be facilitating the session alongside the host Patricia, and Saranjit will be going through the presenting the material for you. So the first thing we would like you to start, like we would like to get a bit of know about you. And the first thing, we will be happy if you go to the from a pad. We already shared the link in the chat, or you might have it already from the call. So where we would like to see or hear about what's your name, and also now we would like you to indicate in the framework path alongside your name that whether you would like to communicate in the breakout room as a written way or as by speaking. It's indicated using these two letters, just one of them or either. And just tell us about what is a small everyday thing that brings you joy that you like doing. So then we will know a little bit more about you. And you can start issuing this. And I myself just give you inspiration. I love playing frisbee and ping pong nowadays. As much as the time and the weather allows, I always have a big bag and carry everything with me just in case I would be ready if there's sun, sun out. I just run to the parks and play these two. So it's something like that or anything that you might be enjoying. So we would like to hear from you. Um, and maybe I can go through in the meantime. I guess we have good enough attendee today, so I can start reminding you the couple of like things that to keep the whole session running in the most best possible way. So again, welcome everyone. So we just first thing to remind you all that this call will be recorded and transcribed. So if you don't want to be visually exist in the call and read your recording, so please turn off your webcam. Um, uh, so the video will be available on YouTube channel after the session, and as quickly as possible, our facilitators just do the all editing and necessary adjustments around it. And captions are also available, so you can just click the CC button, like caption button, and you will be able to access to them. Or we have also Otter AI that helps to do all the transcription for us. So this call and this whole organization have a obviously code of conduct we all expect you to abide by to make sure our community runs well and we all respect each other. So please always adhere to this community participation guidelines. Of course, we encourage everyone to participate and are committed to building a community for all. So please be considerate and respectful to each other. And remember that we are a worldwide community, so you might not be communicating in someone else's primary language. So be respectful to be inclusive and making your, don't hesitate to communicate in the way that you feel yourself more explained. If you experience or witness unacceptable behavior or have any other concerns, please always report it to, don't hesitate to report it by contacting the organizers and Sarah or Gracia using this teams at weareols.org email address. To report an issue involving one of the organizers, please email one of the members individually, either Sarah or Gracia, using the emails prompted here. So as we said, like we're happy and we would appreciate if you can indicate whether you want written or spoken or above kind of rooms to be assigned when it comes to doing some exercises in the breakout rooms to just engage with your peers. There might be technical issues or you might not feel comfortable to speak, so that's also fine. So indicates by adding these initials in the W for written participation, S for spoken participation and discussion. This will help us assign you appropriately in the breakout room. Or you can do both, and we will find out which one is available for you. And if you need any help regarding any part of the session, just you can click Ask for Help button at the top bottom of your screen, or write anything, any questions you might have in the chat that we will be helping you immediately. So today's title is General Tools for Open Science, Metadata, Documentation, Repositories, and Persistent Identifiers. Again, Patricia is our host, and Saranjit will be presenting, and you can find the slides in this very link to follow through, or you can just watch Saranjit to go through the slides. And please use the pad as much as possible to take notes and or take share your ideas and thoughts in any part of the activities. And so other than that, I will be happy to facilitate and help you out. So without further ado, I would like to leave the stage for Saranjit to take over the presentation and hope you enjoy and engage as much as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Ethel. Let me quickly check if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
That looks great. We're good to go.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Saranjit, and today we'll be talking about general tools that you could use on your open science journey or make your work more open science friendly using these tools. I'm not using dual screen, so if there are any questions, either put them in the chat or feel free to stop me at any time point, and we can take those questions if something is not clear. Also, if you notice that you've posted something and I've not seen it or not responded to that question, do let me know, like feel free to unmute. Or I think it's also okay to put your questions in the pad, and then when there is time for discussions, we can pick up from there. But yeah, I would really welcome you to ask your questions, and we can learn from each other about things that are not yet clear during the presentation. So we're going to, in general, talk about 4 tools or resources that you can use in your open science journey. First one would be what is metadata. The second would be about documentation, repositories, and then the fourth one would be persistent identifiers. I'll try to introduce 4 different scenarios in day-to-day research or open source or open science work, and then we'll see what kind of tools or resources we can use in those scenarios. Okay. So yeah, I just covered that. So, okay, so the first scenario, imagine you're going to a library and you want to find a particular book. So you go to the librarian or you look up the online library repository that is there, and you are trying to find a book. So how would you usually try to find a book? You would look for the title of the book, who's the author of the book, or you can also look what is the subject, and then try to find the book in that particular section with that subject. So what you did here is actually you looked up for the metadata about this book. So metadata is nothing but data about the data. So metadata helps you to organize your data properly, find it easily, and also understand better about your data. So metadata, it can either be embedded within the data set or it can be separate from the data. So when we are going to discuss some of these types, and then let's see if you are able to recognize metadata in your day-to-day research work. And then what sorts of information is available in metadata? So it would usually contain information of about how the data was collected or how it was processed. If it's a data set, then what sort of variables or parameters are present in the data set, who collected the data set, for example, which team, which organization collected it, how you can find this data or where to find the data, how you can cite it, or any like legal or standard information about the data. Is all this information is available or is called as metadata. So it's useful because it helps you find a particular data set in an archive of a lot of other data sets, like the example in the library where there are several books and you want to find a particular book. Then the metadata information about that book helps you find that book in that library. It provides you context for future use and some standard vocabulary as well. Moreover, one of the benefits of having metadata is that it's easier to share because it's relatively smaller than the entire data set and does not contain, usually it won't contain restricted information. So it's relatively easier to share metadata information instead of the entire data set. There are different types of metadatas. The first type is descriptive metadata. So this metadata usually provides a context of your data, for example, the variable definition, or if there are any measurement or sampling description, abstract keywords. So such type of metadata is called as descriptive metadata. In the example, in this example on the right side, I've shared a descriptive metadata of a JAWS paper. So JAWS is a journal which publishes open source software papers. So in this they have a particular structure that they would ask you to fill if you're submitting a open source software paper to them. So that would include what is the title of this software piece of software that you're submitting, are there any tags, who are the authors, their ORCID ID, their affiliations, and so on. So all this information about this paper that you're submitting to JAWS is can be called as descriptive metadata. Another type of metadata is structural metadata. So structural, as the name suggests, describes the structure of a particular data. So for example, what are the different file formats present in a particular data folder or so on, or if there is any hierarchy or any dimensions, then such information is called as structural metadata. A simple example would be, again, this is a bit outdated, but image, but a simple example would be a directory or folder on your machine, which includes a number of different, so a particular folder which has different files. It could be like Word files, image files, PDF documents, so different types of files. And then there is some more information on the dimensions as to what is the size of the file, what is the format. So all such information can be classified as structural metadata. And then finally, the third type of metadata is called as administrative metadata. So this kind of information or metadata includes information that can be used to manage that particular data set. It tells about when and how a particular data was created, which software and which version of the software was used in creating that data. So this example is of administrative metadata of an R package. So it's telling us what is the version of this package, what packages uh, um, it imports, what packages or what version of the software it depends on. So here it says it would require minimum R 3.2.3, and then when it was published, and so on. So all such information that uh, is available about this package can be classified as administrative metadata. So now we have the first activity. We won't need to go into breakout rooms here, but it's more of a reflection exercise for you to identify metadata for a data set or software that you use often and see if you can classify it as descriptive, structural, or administrative. So I think we'll take about 5 minutes for this activity. And after 5 minutes, either you can share your thoughts or you can put what you found in Framapad. I don't exactly know the line number, so it should be under activity 1.
It's
Uh,
89 and 89 onwards.
yeah. Okay, so we'll stop for 5 minutes over there and then let's see what people have.
So just to give you some ideas, it might be something about the data set that you're using, uh, collected about a population, and or some toolbox that you're using comes with some its own data. So it might have some metadata for it to facilitate the users easily to understand the structure of the data. Mhm. Maybe I can share my screen again so we can all look together for the examples shared so far. So I can't see the names so far, but
I think since people are still typing, we give them a few more seconds to finish their train of thought.
sure.
Oh, it's really nice to have that timer, Patricia. Thanks. It's really nice. I mean, I've only recently learned about these Zoom timers.
So shall we go through? Shall I read through? Maybe Saranjit, if you have
Yeah,
any comments on this. So
yeah.
when entry was about preprint metadata generated on OPS, I don't know what it refers, but I maybe um, DevOps processes. Descriptive metadata informed by the author plus things like archive, like ROR and DOIs. When entry was about descriptive metadata of genomic samples, I guess one of you is, oh, okay, that's me. Oh, I couldn't. Descriptive metadata of genomic samples collected across different habitats used in this participants lab, which makes a lot of sense to facilitate, of course, the further users navigation through the data. Descriptive metadata is a data in the research that is used to identify the resource, including title, authors, abstract, and method. Structural metadata is about organization, hierarchy, format. Administrative data, an example was about JSONs, README, MDs, and requirements TXT. There's another example for descriptive and also maybe structural metadata from actigraphy data. This gets exported with the actual data from a program that's called Act Studio. And another one was the data set includes descriptive metadata such as participant demographics, exactly, and study information. It also contains structural metadata such as file organization, subject identifiers. This describes how different data files are linked or organized. And yeah, indeed, sometimes softwares comes with also their own ways of descriptions and the versioning, and which is important also to inform about the users, the package structure, functions, dependencies, and license, of course, quite important. The maintenance studies and release date, or using OBS. I am not familiar with them. I don't know if you, Sarah, did. Data set title, authors, and demographic coverage. Another person, again, referred to Galaxy that use descriptor and structural metadata like file formats, and demographic and health surveys program used for research can be identified as administrative metadata. These are very rich and very diverse, and all across the three types covers very nicely, I believe. So thank you for so much for sharing all these. So I guess we can continue, Sanjit, if you don't have anything to add.
Yeah, that's a lot of examples I've
Yeah.
seen for the first time for like metadata, and it's really good that you're able to spot all these places where you see metadata. In your open science journey, no one is going to really ask you to classify metadata, but it's really nice that you can spot them and identify them, because once we start using some of these open tools that we are going to discuss next or shortly, you will have to either populate such information for your research work, or you might be using some tools that require you to understand all these terminologies, or why is it important, and why is it important to fill certain metadata for your data sets. So really excellent examples. Even I don't know what is actigraphy, so I would look that up after this presentation. It's a good idea to like also read each other's responses. You might end up learning new things. So well done, and I hope you keep the enthusiasm going throughout the session today, because we have a few more activities where there would be chances to like reflect on what tools you have been using so far, or what tools are being used in your domain of research. So with that, let's move on to the next scenario. The next scenario is specifically about writing software. So say you had this piece of research work that required you to write some software, and then it's not just about software, but I'm going to use this example of writing software. Um, and you very happily wrote all the software, all the analysis, and then um, you had a conference in the long run. So you submitted some paper based on all this analysis that you've done, and then your paper or your submission is selected a few months later, and then now you need to go back to whatever you had written because you want to create a full presentation out of it. But by that time, I've written 6 months later, so in 6 months' time, you've forgotten why did you write a particular line of code, what was your reasoning behind it, what you were aiming to achieve with that particular line of code or with a particular function that you have written. So, what happened in this case is you forgot to document your work. So, documentation is really essential to help your own future self. So, um, think of yourself as your own best collaborator and try to document your work, the software that you develop, or any other work in your open science or research journey. Try to document information when you are developing that work, so that in the future it's easier. It's not only about remembering things, but it's also easier for you to collect information and prepare like a presentation for a conference, or if you wanted to provide some report based on your work, then it's easier to like create those reports or presentations. So the benefits, there's several benefits. One is it's easy to reuse the work in future, which I just mentioned, and then it's also easy to reference. If you had documented in the past, you can reference that work or build on that work. It also helps to recall meticulous details about the approaches or processes that you had followed. It's only human to forget things over time, or the specific details of why you did the analysis in a particular way, or why did you use a specific parameter or a specific function. So it's always useful if you document such information. Um, when you do that work. So documentation, the scenario I mentioned was about software, but documentation can be done of many different types of research output. So you can document the research data itself. So for that, you can say for data, you can provide a summary of the data. If, for example, you're using an open source hosting platform, There are files called as README files that you can use, where you can provide a summary of the data, or you can give a user guide for future users. So future users does not mean that it doesn't mean that all the research that you're developing is going to have a big community, or you have to develop user guides for a big community. But even for your own research group or for your own future self, if you can document how to use this data set, that can be really useful. Um, in that documentation, you can include information such as how this data can be used, how was it collected, are there any publications associated with this data set, or are there any known errors in the data set. So if there are any known errors, you can document that as well. So for example, if you in the future forget that there was this error, and then um, or if there is another user who starts using your data set, and they end up in a particular situation which was due to this particular error in the data set, you could have saved them from that if you had documented that this data has XYZ error at this moment, or this error is known. So such kind of information you can document about a data set. As an example, here I'm sharing a screenshot of the photovoltaic solar panel energy generation data from UK Power Networks. And what they share in this documentation of the data is some key stats of the data set. For example, how many substations are there, how many days this data was collected over. So it says 480 days from 27th July to 2013 to 19 November 2014. Then it also gives some more details about the frequency at which the data is recorded. So the data is recorded at 10-minute intervals. And then it also shares information about a little bit about what the data set itself is. So some description about the data set, and um, some links to some validation assessment tools and so on. So who collected the data, all this information is available in this documentation of the data. So if someone looks at this documentation, they get an idea of, even before, like, because if they want to access this data for their own research, they can simply download and then go and look for what all information is present inside. But if you provide some documentation to give a guidelines, some guidelines as to who collected the data, what kind of information is present, that is also a useful summary to start from. Um, the other thing that you can document is the software that you're developing. So if you do develop software as a part of your research, then you can use again the README files on your software repository. You can use README files to provide information like how to install this software. So if there is a new user, or you in the future are using the software, you can give some the commands to install the software, or how to use the software. So you can give some basic examples or minimal examples for the user to get up to speed in terms of how to install, how to use, what kind of examples they can do if they use the software that you've developed. You can also use inline comments within the code itself to make it more clear why why did you write a particular line of code or a particular function. So you can use inline comments. If you're releasing your software, then you can provide release notes. Release notes can go with different versions of your software, and you can tell information like what is new in this release. Was a new function included, was a certain function improved, was a some kind of bug that was fixed in that software. So all such information can go in release notes. And then you can also have associated publications, like how are others using this software? So such kind of information you can document about a piece of software. Uh, the example here is about a README file for the Shiny package in R. So in the README file, the authors, they are providing how a user can install this particular package, so what function they can use, and then how can they get started once they have installed the package, what function do they need to use or run to run this particular package. They've also given some examples that people can refer to, and some more links to further reading if people want to learn more about the features of Shiny. So such kind of information in a again, it might feel that why do we want to write all this information? But think of your users or think of you in the future. If you put all this information in a place that's easy to access or is visible, it becomes easier to use your software in the future, and then also makes it also like I've seen that software or data sets that are better documented, it really increases the adaptability. So users uh, or community members find it easier to use software that are properly documented or data sets that are properly documented, and uh, where they can easily find at least the getting started information available. So yeah, it's always a good practice to document your software. And then the other thing which we would usually do the most is documenting the results. So this one is usually in research work. This is the part that people would usually document, the final results. But I would emphasize on the first two as well, the data and the software. Try to document them as you go along with your research work. So yeah, so documentation of results uh, is useful for reproducibility purposes. So if you have you have created some results, trying to provide information about how you arrived at those results, what kind of functions, tools, packages, data, or software you used, and then you can create some sort of reports based on the results that you've got. Okay, um, time for yet another activity. This time, try to find documentation. Again, we are going to take 5 minutes for this one as well. Try to find a documentation for any data set or software that you often use, and think about, was it easy to find, or was that documentation available at a place that is easy to locate, or did you have to dig deeper and then find that piece of documentation? It could be any data or data set or software that you use. Yeah, as previously, you can either unmute after the 5 minute period or add your notes in the from a pad.
I'm gonna share the screen again.
Thank you.
Okay, time is up, but thanks so much. They're very interesting and also very rich experiences shared by you all here. So I relate to most of them. Shall I go through some of them? Maybe we can read through. So one entry is about documentation is very important for oneself and others to reuse, and documentation of software, including README, how to install inline commands, what is new in the updated version, and how others use it. Indeed, and the other entry says, like, when I need it, I usually find it easier to locate documentation by Google searching than by going on the software proper sites. This is again thanks to the Google search obviously picks up. So if there's something available and if you want your software or your information data to be searchable and foundable, of course, more you provide information, you more make this possible for the other users to find you. In this coastal fish assemblage, documentation includes sampling design, set-aside, states, methods, variable description, names, unity, unites, etc. It's easy to find because it's stored with the data set, and the README file documentation helps interpret species, records functional approach and environmental variables if it exists, but could be improved. For instance, sampling methods are described, but some variables definitions needs clarification. That's indeed. Sometimes we have some details written, but sometimes it's a little bit coarse. That needs more. And this is actually wide open science. It's good for this purpose. Maybe you can also contribute and help the documentation where you see the fits and the need for your own. And also you think the community might benefit. Another participant says they Googled Galaxy documentation and they were able to find the documentation for a Galaxy project software with the different release notes versions, admin documentations, and developer documentations, and it was, they say, easy to find. One of you were struggling to find protocol last week and it was not easy to locate. They knew that it was somewhere amongst by files, but it has been they have been working with software so far, and it's often so that they needed to locate the protocol, and because we also want to transfer the knowledge to someone else. You really love a software, but you want those people to also discover it. But if there is not enough information, it's always hard to give all the intricacies or details about a tool that we use, and sometimes our excitement's just stuck. And another person says, like, I found the documentation fairly easy, but some details about the data structure were spread across different documents, which made navigation slightly challenging. That's true. Sometimes we do it, but we don't do it in an organized way. We don't update the old document, but we recreate another better version of it, but the old one still lives. And this is also confusing for end users. And we do this quite often, actually. I came across this situation many times. Another participant, I says, I found a documentation for the software BOTI2 quite quickly after a Google search. The developers provide some basic explanations about the program, although it was a bit confusing at times to find parameters they needed for their specific usage. And last entries about documentation is very important for mastering one's own works when one needs it later. I have used the Kobo Collect tool for data collection. It's easy to understand and use, accessible when you want it, and it prevents relying on proprietary systems. However, it needs to be clearly labeled with required identification information. So all this is quite important and actually reflects almost all aspects that we all encounter day-to-day basis. Obviously, one thing to remember that, like, it's not easy to document as well. It's a good practice, but also it's not easy for when you develop a software. You need a team around you, you need a community around you. Like the users like yourself also sometimes find things that software designer might not think, like, or the tool designers might not see it truly, because it's their job and it's so obvious to them maybe. So that's why I guess that this is very important to, like, maybe share the feedbacks, create an issue in their repo, let them know about that. You think that something might be more facilitating if there is this information there written, and also you contribute to the software you use daily, which is super nice to be a part of something growing. So I guess those are all super nice examples. I don't know, Saranjit, you think? But maybe we can continue, or if you have any comments there.
Very, very good example. So, one thing I wanted to share here was this particular activity was thinking of documentation as a consumer. So, when you are trying to look up for documentation in other projects, is it easy to locate? Is it easy to reuse? So, I would say good open science projects always would have documentations that are easy to access. They're accessible, they're located at convenient places that you can easily spot. Um, and then one of the ways that you can help improve documentation for open science projects, Isil also mentioned that just now, is if you spot some inconsistencies in the documentation of existing open science projects, or if you think that certain thing is missing, um, one of the best things about open science is you can reach out to the maintainers, provided if they have given some way for you to like report these issues. So if they have a repository, you can open a issue on the repository about certain thing that was missing or certain inconsistency in the documentation. Usually, I would say uh, contributing to documentation can be a really good starting point for getting into a open source or open science project. So if there are like huge, massive projects and open source, open science project, and you're not sure where to start, but you did spot some issue with the documentation, some broken link, some typo, some information was missing, you can create an issue, and then you might also end up contributing to that open source, open science project. So it's also a good pathway for you to get into open source or open science projects. So yeah, this is like this exercise again was more from a documentation consumer point of view. But say if you are the creator of the documentation, so if your own project, you're building documentation for your own project, I would say try to build in the open. That's the whole idea of using these open science tools. So when you build in the opens, you don't really have to be perfect. Like your project doesn't have to be really perfect to be able to share with the community. But when you feel like, okay, this is a good enough stage that I have reached with the project, try to share it with the community. And when you share it with the community, you might start getting questions about, say, someone in the community is unable to find XYZ in your tool or package or whatever you're developing. That becomes that is an indicator for you to, okay, this is something that I need to improve in my documentation because the users of my work are not able to find this information. Or if several users are complaining about the same thing, or reaching out to you about the same question or same type of questions, that is another indicator for me. Would be what I would do in that case is, if possible, I'll create a FAQ, so frequently asked questions guide, to go with the project open science tool. If there is a website that you have, you can put up this FAQ or frequently asked questions guide. So that is another type of documentation that you can create for your project. As so this I'm saying as from the point of view of creator of a documentation. So look for these signs or indications from your community, and that's the beauty of building your work in the open. When your community starts giving you input, and you are essentially building the work with the community. So once your project reaches a stage that you are comfortable sharing with the community, feel free to do that. Try to use so for example, OLS is one space. There are also other spaces like the Turing Way or other community where you would find channels like, sometimes I've seen channels like Work Out Loud. So those are some of the places where you can start sharing your project, and then see you will you will start gaining the benefits of developing with the community. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides. We have two more scenarios to go through, and then So 2 more activities and scenarios to go through. Okay, so let's move to the third scenario. So this scenario is about this researcher who has got multiple things going on in their research work. They're doing some work in the chemical laboratory, recording some results. There are some medical records that they're using for their research, some patient demographics that they need to record, some survey data. So there are different pieces of information that this researcher is collecting. And now the question is, where do they put all these different pieces of information? Obviously, you can have a folder on, like as a researcher, you can have a folder on your computer and then you can start putting all this information in that folder. But is there a way in which you can be a bit more organized about storing all different information that you generate or need to generate as a researcher? So the answer is yes. Uh, in such situation, you can use, besides your own computer, you can use repositories. Repositories are storage locations, and you can store different kinds of information that you generate during the research process in repositories. So you can store the data that you produce, the results that are generated, any software or code that you write, or any compiled software. The benefits of having repositories, first of all, I haven't written it there, but having repositories really organizes your work. Again, it would depend if you would want to have public repositories or private repositories. That's completely up to you, and any restrictions on how much can you share your research work. So sometimes there can be certain restrictions. You cannot share all your research work or outputs publicly or openly. So depending on that, you can have private or public repositories. So yeah, the first thing repositories do is really organize your work. They make it easier to share within your research group or with others, if or openly. The repositories also make it easier to find information, and they also make sure that all this information is preserved over time and not lost because you deleted a certain file or folder in your uh, local machine. So there are different types of repositories and they can be used for storing different types of information. The first one we are going to discuss here is Zenodo. So Zenodo is quite useful if you would want to store releases or version releases of your data or software or particular publications. Um, Zenodo, I think you might have come across Zenodo in when referring to certain slides from the previous sessions. I can't tell immediately, but Zenodo is quite useful if you would want to even deposit slides for different presentations that you do. The example here sharing is the Zenodo repository for the Turing Way project, where they deposit all the illustrations that are developed during Turing Way book dashes or otherwise, and are shared under CC BY 4.0 license for reuse. Um, I would really recommend, if you have some presentations that you can share openly, try to deposit those presentations as well on Zenodo. And I think you can link your ORCID with your Zenodo. So once you have done that, you can see all whatever you deposit or any of your publications, even on your ORCID account. Um, yeah. And then the other repository that you can use to store research data, results, or code is GitHub. There are also some other similar hosting repositories like GitLab, Bitbucket. But in this case, right now I'm sharing this example of GitHub where you can store data, results, software, and also version control it. So here the example is of the R dev guide, uh, which is built or stored or has all the information on this GitHub repository under the R Devil organization. So GitHub can be quite useful if you would want a storage location or a remote storage location for your data or software. There is one more thing that I wanted to share here, but it will also come up in the last scenario. When you deposit research information on Zenodo or on Zenodo, you can get a DOI for it. So we are going to discuss a bit more about DOIs, but I did want to mention it here that when you do so, you can get DOI. For example, you can get a DOI for your slides, for your presentations, and then that way also you can uniquely identify your work. So we are going to come to it in a bit. And with GitHub, the point to mention here was about version control. So if you're developing software, you can do it and store it on GitHub, and it provides you the benefit of having version controlled work. So you need not have to develop the entire software before depositing it to or pushing it to GitHub. You can do it step by step, and then every push or in GitHub or in the language of version control, every commit you make gets recorded and is version control. So you save yourself from losing all the information because you accidentally deleted some file or folder because you have all this past version control history on your remote GitHub repository. Okay, time for the third exercise, again for 5 minutes. In this exercise, try to find repositories on either GitHub or Zenodo for any particular data set or software that you use. You can, in your domain, so you can type Zenodo or GitHub and then the name of your data set that you're using or the domain, and then try to see if you can find something on GitHub or Zenodo that already exists, and let us know, did you come across this before? Had you seen this GitHub or Zenodo repository before? So yeah, 5 minutes for this exercise. Yeah, feel free to add your thoughts in the Pad around line 129.
Uh, just being aware of time to move on fast. So this time maybe I will just a little bit browse through the entries. So I've read through all, and it's quite obvious that most of you already have been interacted with GitHub and Zenode somewhat way, either through software that you're using, or you put your own software and documentations in Zenode, which is quite nice to know already. These practices are part of your day-to-day research activities. And it takes time, like it's very complicated. One of you mentioned, indeed, GitHub is complicated, but it takes time and a lot of practices. And also, again, what Sanjit was saying, if you start contributing to other tools that you're using, there's also yet another chance to learn about GitHub and how to use it as a more practicalities and learn more about it. So one of you were saying, I guess one of you were not able to find about photonics documentations on Zenodo. So yes, Zenodo is one of the most used platforms for data or documentation storage, but sometimes depends on the field. Some narrow fields or some fields that are so specific, they might have their own kind of their repositories or storage places. You might want to check if there's any kind of specific platforms exist, maybe more to serve to your needs. Then maybe Zenodo is not the first preference for that community purposes. What else we can say? I don't know, Sanjit, if there's any further, there's something you want to contribute.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that point of these tools being hard to get started with. I would reiterate, like, if there is an open source project that you find yourself looking up to or using a lot, again, contributing to their documentation or spotting typos in their documentation, opening issues, these can be ways for you to get familiar with GitHub and similar tools. So also, the other point I was going to make here was about some open source, open science projects I've seen host newcomer contributor hours. So if you find something similar for your project, I've seen something for projects from SciPy. They do these newcomer contributor hours. So these are good places for you to go and then either listen to what people are talking about or how they're using particular tools. That can also be a way to learn. Um, Again, you don't have to be perfect. Even I'm a research software engineer, and I still find myself learning so many things every day about these tools and different techniques. So don't overwhelm yourself trying to learn everything in one go. But if you find like community spaces or spaces where you feel comfortable interacting or asking questions, try to join such spaces. Yeah, I can't tell from the top of my head, but I think there are some communities that do like newcomers office hours. So those are spaces that you can go, and then you might feel more comfortable asking your questions in such spaces. Or I think even the Turing Way project, when they do their book dashes, there are onboarding sessions if you're new to GitHub. So those can be really useful. So you um, there is a person helping you learn the ropes, and you get more comfortable with it. Again, the book dashes, the Turing Way book dashes, another a very good place for you to implement what you learned about GitHub and then try to understand that whole workflow of putting things on GitHub, merging pull requests, contributing, and so on. So when you start doing it, or you find spaces where you get those chances to actually implement what you're learning, you will find that over time you get more and more comfortable with these tools. Um, and I think documentation or writing some snippets of code, even creating issues on GitHub repos is also a good way, because you get an idea of, okay, where is where can I find these issues, how do I write, how much information should I provide. So all these open science projects would appreciate, I feel, you finding any typos or um, new features to include in their project. So again, trying to be mindful of time, we go to the last scenario. Okay. Okay, so the last scenario is about, okay, sorry, again about different researchers doing all sorts of work, collecting all sorts of research information, generating results, patient demographics, survey data. So in this case, there are three researchers, not one, and everyone is collecting all this different information in a research lab. They're collecting all this information and recording all this information. So how can we uniquely identify a particular researcher's work, or even a researcher, given researcher uniquely identify their own work. So for for this purpose, you can use something called as persistent identifiers, or PIDs. There are different types of PIDs. They serve as a long-lasting reference for research work, and they would uniquely point to a digital entity. So if, say, a research paper has a persistent ID or a DOI, if you try to resolve those DI, you can uniquely point to this particular research paper or locate this research paper. The other beauty of PIDs is that they are machine readable. So one of the PIDs are ORCID, which is Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. Um, Many people in academic research have ORCID IDs. So ORCID provide a valid information about a particular person, a particular researcher. They are free, and it's like a 16-digit numeric code. Um, and it would uniquely identify a particular researcher or contributor of a scholarly communication. I pasted a screenshot of my ORCID account. So it's that 16 digit, the one with the 4 zeros and then so on. So that 16-digit numeric code is my ORCID ID. So now some of the features of ORCID ID, first of all, they are unique to the person. Um, they are useful to link a researcher with their research and research related outputs. Um, so one ORCID can last throughout the individual's career. So even if someone changes, say, their institute or move to a different organization, they do not have to change their ORCID ID, and they can keep a record of all the research outputs that they have produced. And you can also connect ORCID to your professional information, for example, any affiliations that you have got, any grants or publications that you have made, etc., etc. I mentioned this earlier, but if I'm trying to repeat the point again, you can link your Zenodo with your ORCID account. And then if you're submitting things on Zenodo, slides, papers, software releases, data release, all that information, that can also reflect on your ORCID account if you have linked them. Um, in For this, if you have not yet come across DataSite, I would highly recommend exploring the I think they also do community events. um, I think after this call ends, I'll share some more links to DataSite. So if you would want to learn more about different kinds of persistent identifiers, DataSite is another place that you can find those information. Um, Another type of persistent identifier is DOI, or digital object identifiers. Uh, I was first introduced to DOIs when had published a paper. So until then, I used to think that DOIs are only reserved for papers. But that's not the case. You can have a DOI to cite any data, also for software or any other types of media besides papers or journal articles. DOIs can also be provided, like associated with presentation slides, blog posts, videos, even logos. Um, DOIs are provided and maintained by this international organization for standardization. So the features of DOIs are, again, they are static pointers to any documents on the internet. So uh, if so some having DOIs makes it easier to cite research products, and that way it is also easier to uniquely point to a particular research product. So in this example here, um, if I click on this particular DOI, this 10.5067, it will always take me to this particular website. It will always result to this web page, which contains a particular data set from Earth Data ASDC. And it tells me that you can download this data set here. So DOIs are not like dynamic URLs that will change, but they are static. So each time someone refers to this particular link, it will always take them to this web page on the internet. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this slide for now, and then we move to the final exercise. This exercise is about finding and resolving a DOI. Resolving means that you will be taken to information about that particular product that is linked to the particular DOI. So what you need to do is either you can find DOI for some data set or software that you use often. Um, find the link to that DOI. If you cannot find something, you can use the link that I have provided here in the sub point 2 for the first point. And then what you need to do is you have to go to this page, www.doi.org, scroll down, and then you should find something, a line saying try resolving a DOI name. Paste the link over there and then click on try resolving. Click on submit, and then you should be directed to the page that cites that particular data set. So either you can use a DOI for your for a dataset or software that you use, or you can use the example that I've given in the task. I think I've also pasted this activity on Framapad so that it's easier to copy and follow. So let me stop sharing.
I guess this exercise needed finding a DOI and just going to this website, the results I made. There was so there are a couple of several ideas has been shared. So it's a nice tool to check, obviously, also the DOI that we create that is working. So I guess one of you, I found out is the issue, which is nice to know. So one of you has used the DOI of an original paper, which published, for a software blast. And it helped you to go back to the Word paper. Yeah, sometimes I guess the authors of the softwares that just relies on the DOI of the publication because they already list the software there, and they might have to just use one single unitary identifier to maybe sometimes avoid confusion or just stay with the unique identifier for the both resources. So one of you used the DOI for the parent database Genesis project and was able to locate the DOI and resolve it, which took the original article, they say, of the data set. Okay, so it's apparently all the attempts worked as intended, so which is nice to know. So this tool is working as necessary, and it's just something that we should be always looking for our feature, also the producers or deliverables that we want them to be found out also through searches and also give it a little bit more body, right, to make it a uniquely identified belongs to you. Even today, to my name, I keep getting a lot of like publication. I have no idea that I didn't neither written or somewhat. They obviously our names are repetitive or like so we want to be identified with a unique identifier, or our works we want to be identified with a unique identifier to make sure they are matched with the right resources and authors. So I guess it worked fine. I don't know, Sanjit, do you have any comments to make?
No, I think people have done that exercise well, so no comments.
Okay,
But yeah,
cool.
if because we are limited in time, if there are any questions, feel free to drop them on Slack, and then I'll try to take a look from there.
Let me stop sharing, and if you want to wrap up, so I'll...
Yeah, I think wrap up is on me. So thank you everyone, especially Saranjit for all your expertise and Ishil for facilitating. So just a reminder that we have in the Framapad from line 184 a closing and checkout, so you can highlight what you've learned today and you can give us feedback what you liked and which of the bits we could of the cohort calls we could improve. We read all the comments. Sometimes, it's a little bit difficult to implement changes at short notice, but we will do our best and it will definitely be noted. As Saranjit also said, we didn't have tons of times at the end for questions. But please make use of the Slack channel and ask there. You can ask either in your cohort channel, you can ask experts directly, but the wider community is great. So you can like ask on the open channels and you will get really great answers. Yeah, just the last bit that the second cohort call this week, so on Thursday at the same time, will be about open data. And also remember that if there are topics that you would like to dig in a little bit deeper or something where you have like a really specific need, you can put book a coaching session with the expert that covered that training session. So the sign up form is also linked from the pad. Do make use of that. We have like a great group of experts, and they are experts. They know what they're talking about, and this is your unique opportunity to pick their brains on anything specific to your work. But yeah, thank you for staying on, even if we run a little bit over time. Thank you again, Saranjeet and Ishil, and everyone who has joined us today, and have a good rest of your week. See some of you on Thursday.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
joining.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.